The scent of the peace roses always got to me. It was Ellen's favorite. She said it smelled like forgiveness. I was standing in the garden she designed, the late afternoon Denver sun warming the back of my neck, thinking about how much she would have loved to see our son, Mark, get married. In my world, a world I'd left behind, peace was just the quiet interval between wars. But here, with the drone of a distant lawnmower and the smell of my wife's roses, it almost felt real. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A gentle, insistent vibration against my leg. I pulled it out, expecting a photo from Mark of the new house. He and his fiancée, Darian, were supposed to be picking out paint colors. I just wired the final payment on the place 3 days ago. $215,000. A wedding gift. A foundation for their future. My foundation for them. I smiled before I even read the message. The screen lit up. It was from Mark. Dad, you're not allowed to vacation in Spain. Darian says, only for family. I read it once, then a second time. My thumb hovered over the screen, as if trying to wipe the words away. 11 words. That's all it took to dismantle 30 years of fatherhood. You know, in my old life, I specialized in stress testing systems. I'd find a single point of failure in a billion-dollar corporation, the one tiny crack in the foundation that could bring the whole edifice crashing down. And in that moment, I wasn't a father reading a thoughtless text from his son. I was a structural engineer looking at a fatal flaw. Let's break it down. Darian says, not we decided, not we were thinking. A clear statement of the chain of command. My son was no longer a principal in his own life. He was a messenger, only for family. A clear delineation of the new corporate structure. I was an outside investor, a source of capital, not a member of the board. My contribution of $215,000 wasn't a gift cementing a bond. It was a buy-in to a company that had just declared me a non-entity. The vacation to Spain, the one I'd been planning with them for months to celebrate their engagement, was now a shareholder meeting I wasn't invited to. Something inside me didn't break. It didn't even crack. It clicked. It was the sound of a heavy, well-oiled tumbler falling into place in a vault that hadn't been opened in a decade. The quiet retiree in the garden, the grieving widower tending his late wife's roses, that man stepped aside. And the other man, the one I used to be, stepped forward. I didn't feel anger. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. It clouds judgment. What I felt was a cold, pure clarity. The kind you get when you're looking at a spreadsheet and you finally see the elegant, brutal math of a hostile takeover. They had made a move. A clumsy one. They had declared their terms. Now, I would declare mine. I walked back into the quiet of my house, the scent of roses fading behind me. I poured a glass of ice water and watched the cubes crackle and shift. The house was too big for one person, a monument to a life that was over. Or so I'd thought. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Mark. Calling Mark would be like yelling at a puppet. I made 2 other calls instead. The first was to my lawyer, John Tenney, a man who had handled the legal side of my most aggressive acquisitions for 20 years. John, it's Frank Miller. Frank, good to hear you. Everything all right? His voice was calm, professional. The property on Aspen Lane. The one for Mark. Yes. The title transfer should be finalized by the end of the week. Congratulations again. Stop it, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Cancel my final payment transfer, and I want you to initiate the process to reclaim the title. Cite breach of the gift agreement. There was a pause, not of confusion, but of understanding. John had known me for a long time. He never asked why. He only asked how. On what ground, Frank? Bad faith, I said. The gift was made under the assumption of inclusion in a family unit. That assumption has been voided. You'll find the right language. Consider it done, Frank. Click. The second call was to Sarah Jenkins, the most aggressive real estate agent in Cherry Creek. A shark who smelled blood from a mile away. Sarah, Frank Miller. Frank, I was just thinking about you. Did Mark and Darian love the house? They did, I said, which is why you're going to love the commission. I want you to sell it. A stunned silence. Sell. Mark's house. It's not Mark's house. It's my house. And I want it on the market by noon tomorrow. Price it to sell yesterday. I don't care about maximizing profit. I care about speed and finality. I could hear the gears turning in her head, the dollar signs lighting up. Frank, I can have an offer by tomorrow night. Good, I said and hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, the cold glass of water sweating in my hand. They thought they were dealing with a lonely old man, a soft touch, a walking wallet to be drained at their convenience. They thought they could take my money, take my son, and then politely show me the door. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea what they had just started. This wasn't about a house anymore. It wasn't about a vacation in Spain. It was about a lesson. A very expensive lesson in the true meaning of the words return on investment. And I was about to become the best, most ruthless teacher they had ever had. The quiet in the house lasted exactly 54 minutes. I had just finished loading the dishwasher, the simple, methodical task, a calming ritual. I was wiping down the granite countertops when my phone rang, a shrill, insistent demand. The caller ID flashed Mark. The storm had made landfall. I let it ring 3 times before answering. A small, calculated delay. A reminder of who was in control. Hello, Mark. Dad? What the hell did you do? He wasn't yelling. He was screaming. It was a thin, panicked sound, the cry of someone who'd never been truly hit before. Sarah Jenkins just called me. She said you're listing the house. Our house. It's my house, Mark, I said calmly, taking a seat at the kitchen island. And yes, I am. Why? How could you? We were picking out paint. Darian is in tears. You're destroying everything. I listened to the words. Our house. Darian is in tears. You're destroying everything. It was a script, and a poorly written one at that. Full of emotion, empty of substance. Mark, I said, my voice level, the tone I used to use when explaining to a failing CEO why his company was about to be liquidated. Let's be logical. A gift is a transaction, an exchange based on a mutual understanding. The gift of the house was predicated on the understanding that we were a family building a future together. Your fiancée, through you, clarified the terms of that arrangement this afternoon. She defined the family unit. I did not appear to be included. What are you talking about? It was a text message. A stupid text message. 11 words can seal a multi-billion-dollar deal or start a war, son. Words have consequences, especially when they're used to draw a line in the sand. I paused, letting the silence stretch. I could hear his ragged breathing. Then I heard something else. A faint whisper in the background. Sharp, sibilant. Tell him he's being cruel. Tell him he's punishing you for no reason. It was Darian, coaching him, feeding him his lines. The confirmation was so clean, so precise. It was almost beautiful. My son wasn't just being influenced. He was being operated. He was a mouthpiece. And in that moment, any lingering trace of paternal hurt vanished, replaced by the cold focus of a strategist identifying the opposing commander. Mark's voice came back on the line, laced with a fresh, synthetic outrage. This is cruel, Dad. You're punishing me for no reason. This isn't about a trip to Spain. It's about you trying to control my life. No, Mark, I said, and a sliver of ice entered my voice. This is about me respecting the terms Darian set. She doesn't consider me family. I accept her position. Therefore, I am reallocating my assets accordingly. It's simple asset management, something you and Darian should learn about. You're a bastard, he choked out, the coach lines failing him, leaving only raw, impotent fury. Perhaps, I conceded, but I'm a bastard who pays his own bills. There's nothing more to discuss. I hung up before he could respond. The line went dead, but the house was no longer quiet. It was humming with the energy of a newly engaged conflict. I had returned fire. I had confirmed the enemy's position, but I was still blind. I was reacting, and I never, ever stay in a reactive position. It's tactical suicide. It was time to go on the offensive. I scrolled through my contacts to a name that hadn't been called in 3 years. Silas. No last name, just Silas. He was a man who moved in the shadows I had long since left. Ex-Mossad, or so the rumor went. The details didn't matter. What mattered was his results. He found things people thought were buried forever under layers of concrete, lies, and time. He answered on the first ring, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Frank, Silas, I have a project for you. I'm listening. No pleasantries. Silas didn't do pleasantries. A family. by the name of Vance. The father is Lawrence Vance. The daughter is Darian Vance. They operate in the Cherry Hills, Greenwood Village social circles. They present as old money. I want to know if that presentation is accurate. You want a standard financial workup? No, I said, my eyes drifting to a framed photo on the wall. Ellen and a 10-year-old Mark, smiling on a beach in Hawaii. I want more than that. I want a full structural analysis. I want to know every asset, every debt, every shell corporation, every lawsuit, every creditor. I want to know who they owe, who they've cheated, who hates them. I want to see the cracks in their foundation. I want to know what they had for breakfast 3 years ago if it was paid for with someone else's money. I want to know everything, down to the bedrock. There was a short pause. I could almost hear the man smiling on the other end of the line. This was the kind of work he lived for. Consider it a deep-core drilling operation, Silas said. I'll send you the preliminary report when I hit the first layer of shale. The call ended. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. They thought this was a family drama, a fight over feelings and a vacation. They were about to find out they hadn't picked a fight with a retired old man. They had declared war on a sovereign entity, and they had no idea of the scorched earth policies I was capable of. The house was just the opening salvo. Now, the real campaign was about to begin. 3 days, 72 hours of calculated silence. Mark had tried calling another dozen times, his panicked voicemails shifting from rage to desperate pleading. Darian had sent a single, saccharine text. Frank, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We love you and just want to talk. A tactical retreat, designed to look like an olive branch. I ignore them all. In any negotiation, the first person to break the silence is the one who's losing. I spent the time in the garden, pruning Ellen's roses with surgical precision, my mind 1,000 miles away. I was running diagnostics, modeling scenarios. The silence wasn't passive. It was an act of gathering power. I was waiting for information. I was waiting for Silas. On the evening of the third day, it arrived. Not as a phone call, but as a single, sterile email with the subject line, Asset Report, Vance. Attached was a triple encrypted .7z file. I poured myself 2 fingers of Blanton's, the good stuff I saved for signing deals or burying adversaries, and sat down at the heavy oak desk in my study. The room was my old command center, filled with books on economic theory, military strategy, and corporate law. I hadn't worked in here for years, but it felt like coming home. I entered the decryption key and the file opened. It wasn't a report. It was an autopsy. Silas, in his ruthlessly efficient way, had laid out the Vance family's entire financial existence like a patient etherized upon a table. His opening line set the tone for everything that followed. Frank, you asked me to drill. I didn't hit shale. I hit a septic tank. I took a slow sip of the bourbon, its warmth spreading through my chest, and I read. The Vance family didn't have old money. They didn't even have new money. They had debt. Mountains of it, structured with the kind of desperate creativity you only see right before total collapse. Their magnificent Cherry Hills mansion, a house of cards. It was leveraged to the hilt with a first mortgage, second mortgage, and a third, high-interest private loan from a lender in the Cayman Islands. A foreclosure notice had been filed and then forestalled with a partial payment just 2 months ago. They weren't living in a home. They were squatting on a bank's non-performing asset. Lawrence Vance's investment firm, Vance Capital Partners. It was a ghost. A website, a glossy brochure, and a rented mailbox at a UPS store. It had no clients, no assets under management, no SEC filings. It was a prop, a stage set for his performance as a financial titan. His last real job, as a mid-level VP at Lehman Brothers, had ended in 2008. Since then, it was a string of failed ventures and borrowed money, each new loan taken out to pay the interest on the last. His only real skill was projecting an aura of wealth and confidence. He was a confidence man. Their only genuine asset was their reputation. Their membership at the Glenmore Country Club, paid for on a credit card that was currently maxed out. Their table at the Denver Health Foundation Gala, comped in exchange for Lawrence promising to bring in big donors he didn't know. It was all a shimmering, beautiful mirage. Then I got to Darian's file, and the cold clarity sharpened to a razor's edge. Her education at the University of Colorado Boulder was legitimate, but her lifestyle since, the designer clothes, the luxury apartment before she moved in with Mark, the Mercedes C-Class, was not funded by a trust fund. Silas had uncovered a pattern, a string of older, wealthy benefactors, relationships that lasted an average of 18 months, coinciding with lavish gifts and trips, and ending abruptly when the financial tap ran dry. She wasn't just a spoiled rich girl. She was a professional, a predator who had honed her skills and was now aiming for the big score. I leaned back in my leather chair, the glass cool against my hand. The text message wasn't a misunderstanding. The vacation wasn't just a vacation. It was all so clear now. My son, my kind, trusting, slightly naive son, wasn't a partner in this. He was the target, the gateway. He was the key to what they saw as the ultimate prize, me. A retired, lonely widower with a portfolio they must have imagined was vast and, more importantly, poorly managed by a mind softened by age and grief. The $215,000 for the house wasn't a wedding gift to them. It was a liquidity test, a probe to see how easily the money flowed, how deep the well was. And when the check cleared without a single question, they knew they'd hooked a big one. The trip to Spain? It wasn't a family vacation. It was a victory tour, a celebration of their successful acquisition of my son and, by extension, my legacy. And the phrase, only for family, it wasn't a petty exclusion. It was a corporate declaration, a statement of ownership. They now own the asset, Mark, and were cutting the previous stakeholder, me, out of the picture. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This wasn't personal anymore. Personal is messy, emotional. This was a business transaction. They had identified a target, performed their due diligence, poorly, as it turned out, and initiated a hostile takeover of my family. They had made just one fatal miscalculation. They thought they were the sharks. They assumed they were dealing with a guppy. I took another sip of my bourbon and looked at the picture of Ellen and Mark again. For a moment, the father returned, feeling a deep, hollow ache for the son who was being played so completely. Then the strategist took over again. Pity wouldn't save him. Only a lesson would. A lesson so profound, so devastating, it would be seared into his memory forever. They thought they were acquiring a new asset. They had no idea they were initiating a hostile takeover of themselves. And I was about to chair the board meeting where I would liquidate their entire existence. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Mark again, but this time his tone was different. The rage was gone, replaced by a strained, artificial calm. Dad, look, I'm sorry about how I acted. Things just got heated. Darian and I talked and want to make things right. We want to take you to dinner, to apologize properly. Lawrence and his wife will be there too. A real family dinner. Please. The script was better this time, more polished. They'd clearly rehearsed. The Van Cess were escalating, moving for proxy war, fought through my son to direct engagement. They wanted to get me to the table. They wanted to size me up, to apply their legendary charm in person and smooth over this unexpected obstacle. An obstacle they'd labeled Frank's irrational tantrum. Of course, son, I said, my voice soft, tinged with a weary magnanimity. I let a bit of the lonely old man persona seep back in. I like that very much. He suggested a place. Shanahan's. Of course. The quintessential Denver steakhouse for the C&B scene crowd. A place designed for projecting power and success. A place where a $300 bill for 4 people was considered a light evening. A perfect stage for the Vance family's particular brand of theater. I arrived exactly on time. Not a minute early, not a minute late. Punctuality is a form of power. I was wearing a simple gray suit, well-tailored but a decade old. My watch was a modest Hamilton, the same one I'd worn for 20 years. I cultivated the image of a man who was comfortable but not flashy. A man whose wealth was a quiet, settled fact, not a loud proclamation. They were already there, seated at a prime booth. Lawrence Vance stood up as I approached. He was exactly as Silas's file had described him. Tall, silver-haired, with the predatory smile and firm handshake of a man who'd closed 1,000 deals, mostly imaginary. His suit was impeccable, his watch a gleaming Rolex that screamed, "Look at me." He radiated an expensive, hollow confidence. "Frank, a pleasure to finally meet you properly," he boomed, clapping me on the shoulder. "I am Lorenz. This is my wife, Eleanor." Eleanor was a pale, nervous woman draped in pearls and a forced smile, a decorative asset. And then there was Darian. She rose gracefully, a vision in a silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. She glided over and gave me a light, air kiss on the cheek, her perfume a subtle cloud of Chanel No. 5. "Frank," she said, her voice like warm honey, "thank you so much for coming. We were so worried about you." The performance was flawless. The concerned daughter-in-law, the picture of grace and contrition. Mark, my son, just stood there, looking relieved and deeply uncomfortable, a pawn on a chessboard he didn't even know he was playing on. We sat down, and the game began. For the next 2 hours, I played the part they'd cast for me. The slightly befuddled, grief-stricken father, overwhelmed by his son's new, sophisticated world. I let my sentences trail off. I asked naive questions. I smiled wistfully when they talked about their plans. Lawrence held court, dominating the conversation with tales of his fictitious investment triumphs. He dropped names of senators and CEOs, casually mentioning golf games at Augusta and ski trips to Gstaad. It was a masterclass in illusion. He was building a world of immense wealth and influence around us, and I was the prime audience member he needed to convince. "Frank," he said, leaning in conspiratorially after the stakes arrived, "Mark tells me you've done quite well for yourself in the consulting world. We should talk. I'm putting together a very exclusive private equity fund. Next-level stuff. Disrupting the energy sector. With your background and my connections, we could do great things. A real family enterprise." There it was. The hook. The bait. The reason for this entire charade. He wasn't just trying to calm me down. He was trying to bring me into the fold, to get his hands directly on the controls of my portfolio. I chewed a piece of my filet mignon, nodding slowly. "Oh, I don't know, Lawrence. All that financial stuff, it's a young man's game. Since Ellen passed, I've mostly just focused on my garden. Stocks, bonds, it's all so confusing these days." I saw a flicker of triumph in his eyes, a tiny, almost imperceptible gleam that said, "Got him." He saw a simpleton, a fish not just on the line, but flopping in the boat, ready for the cooler. Darian played her part to perfection, focusing all her attention on Mark. She'd touch his arm when he spoke, gaze at him with adoration, laugh at his jokes. It was a public display of ownership, meant to reassure everyone, especially me, that my son was in the best possible hands. She even turned to me at one point, her brow furrowed with theatrical concern. "Frank, we were so devastated about the house. It was just a silly slip of the tongue. Of course your family. I was just so excited about our first trip as husband and wife. I wasn't thinking. Can you forgive me?" I looked at this beautiful, calculating young woman, and I gave her a warm, forgiving smile. "My dear, think nothing of it. Water under the bridge." An old man's overreaction. The relief that washed over the table was palpable. Mark looked like he could cry. Lawrence leaned back, expansive and victorious. Darian's perfect smile became genuine for a fraction of a second. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully managed the grumpy old asset and brought him back in line. We finished the dinner with expensive coffee and a dessert that was more architecture than food. As we stood to leave, Lawrence clapped me on the shoulder again, his grip a little too firm. "We'll get that house situation sorted out, Frank. Don't you worry. And you and I will have lunch next week. We'll talk business. Family business." I just smiled. I'd like that. I drove home through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Denver, the taste of overpriced steaks still in my mouth. The evening hadn't been a dinner. It had been a reconnaissance mission. I had walked into the enemy's camp under a flag of truce, and they had willingly shown me their entire battle plan. They weren't just arrogant, they were sloppy. Their hunger made them careless. They had confirmed every one of Silas's findings. More than that, they had revealed their ultimate objective, not just to leech off me, but to absorb me. They thought they had me fooled. They thought they were the wolves, and I was the lost sheep. The truth was, I had just spent 2 hours watching a pair of coyotes circle a bear trap, convinced it was a picnic basket, and I was the one who was about to spring it. I didn't call Lawrence for lunch. I let the invitation hang in the air, a loose thread he would keep pulling, wondering why it wasn't tightening. Instead, I went back to my study, back to the cold, hard data of Silas's report. The dinner had provided the psychological profile. Now I needed the weapon. I scrolled past the mortgages, the credit card statements, the list of shell corporations. I was looking for something else. A loose end. A mistake. Even the most careful con men make them, usually early in their careers before they've perfected their craft. And then I saw it. A footnote in the section on Lawrence's failed ventures. A company called Brazos Energy Development, based in Houston, dissolved in 2007. There was a lawsuit attached, filed by Lawrence's partner, a man named Arthur Finch. The suit was dismissed on a technicality, lack of evidence. But Silas had appended a note. Finch lost everything. House, savings, career. Rumor on the street was that Vance walked away with the tech and left Finch holding an empty bag. Houston, a city built on oil, ambition, and handshake deals that could make you a millionaire or a pauper by sunset. It was a world I understood. The next morning, I booked a one-way flight to Hobby Airport. I didn't pack a suit. I wore jeans, a comfortable polo shirt, and a light jacket. I looked like any other retiree heading south to visit his grandkids. It's always best to be underestimated. Arthur Finch's office wasn't on the gleaming glass floors of the downtown skyscrapers. It was in a dusty, 2-story brick building in a forgotten part of town, smelling of stale coffee and regret. The sign on the door was faded. A. Finch, Geological Consulting. I found him hunched over a light table, staring at a seismic chart that looked as old as he did. He was a thin, wiry man with tired eyes and the permanent slump of a defeated fighter. He looked up as I entered, his gaze wary, suspicious of any unexpected visitor. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Mr. Finch, my name is Frank Miller. I'd like to talk to you about Lawrence Vance." His whole body tensed. A flicker of something, old anger, old pain, flashed in his eyes before being extinguished by a wave of weary resignation. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time," he said, turning back to his chart. "And I've been better for it. Whatever he's selling you, don't buy it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm busy." I didn't move. "He's not selling me anything, Mr. Finch. He's trying to merge his family with mine. And I have a policy of conducting extreme due diligence on all potential partners." That got his attention. He slowly turned around, studying me. He saw a quiet man in his 60s, with calm eyes and a steady posture. He didn't see a threat. He saw a peer, maybe even a potential victim. "Let me guess," he said with a bitter little smile. "He has a daughter?" "He does," I confirmed. He nodded slowly, a sad, knowing gesture. "Then you're a braver man than I am, Mr. Miller. What do you want from me?" "The lawsuit is public record. He won. I lost. End of story." "Lawsuits only tell the official story," I said, pulling a simple wooden chair up to his desk. "I'm more interested in the unofficial one. The one about Brazos Energy. The one about the patent for the subterranean mapping algorithm you developed." Arthur went still. His eyes narrowed. I had just mentioned something that wasn't in the public record. I had shown him I'd done more than a Google search. He was silent for a full minute, the only sound the hum of the old fluorescent lights overhead. "He didn't just steal the company," Arthur finally said, his voice low and hard. "He stole my life's work. We were 50-50 partners. I was the brains. He was the money and the mouth. I developed a new way to analyze seismic data to find small, deep pockets of natural gas that the big players missed. It was revolutionary. We were about to secure a second round of funding that would have set us up for life." He stared at a crack in the wall, seeing a ghost from 15 years ago. The day before the meeting with the investors, he came to my office, said we needed to restructure our partnership agreement for tax purposes. A new holding company. He had all the paperwork from his fancy lawyers. I was a geologist, not a lawyer. I trusted him. I signed. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. The documents I signed transferred 100% of the patent rights to his new shell company, the one I wasn't a part of. The next day, he dissolved our original partnership, took the patent, sold it to a major energy conglomerate for a seven-figure sum, and disappeared. The money I'd put in, the equipment, everything, it was all tied to the old company. It vanished along with him. And the lawsuit? I asked quietly. My word against his. The documents I signed were ironclad. My lawyer said I was an idiot for signing them. He was right. Vance's lawyers buried me in motions. I ran out of money long before we ever got to discovery. That's how he wins. He doesn't beat you in the fight. He just makes the fight too expensive for you to continue. I nodded. It was a classic corporate raider tactic. Brutal, effective, and entirely in character for Lawrence Vance. Did you keep any of the original paperwork, Arthur? I asked. Anything from before the restructuring? Memos, drafts of the agreement, emails between the two of you discussing your 50-50 split. He looked at me, a glimmer of understanding dawning in his tired eyes. He wasn't looking at a victim anymore. He was looking at a hunter. He got up, walked to a tall, metal filing cabinet in the corner, and pulled open a squealing drawer. He rummaged for a moment before pulling out a dusty accordion file, its elastic band dry-rotted and crumbling. After I lost everything, he said, his voice barely a whisper, I couldn't bring myself to throw this away. It's all I have left of the man I used to be. He opened it on the desk. Inside were the original partnership agreements, signed by both of them. Emails printed out, detailing their shared vision and profit structure. Even a handwritten note from Vance on a cocktail napkin from a night they'd made the deal, scribbled with the words, Finch and Vance, 50-50 to the moon. It wasn't enough to win a lawsuit 15 years later, but it was more than enough to prove a pattern of deliberate, calculated fraud. It was a story, a very ugly, very compelling story. I didn't touch the papers. I don't want to take these, Arthur. But would you allow me to make high-resolution scans of everything in this file? What are you going to do? He asked, not with hope, but with a raw, academic curiosity. Lawrence Vance thinks he's building an empire, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. I'm just going to show him that he built it on a foundation of sand, right over a sinkhole, and I'm about to trigger a small, localized earthquake. He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly pushed the file across the desk. Burn him to the ground, Mr. Miller. I spent the next hour at a Kinko's, meticulously scanning every single page. As I fed the last document into the machine, I felt the final piece of the mechanism click into place. I wasn't just armed with information anymore. I was armed with a narrative, a ghost story, and I knew exactly when and where I was going to tell it. The trap was no longer a concept. It now had teeth, and they were razor sharp. Flying back to Denver, I felt a sense of profound, icy calm. The plan was no longer a series of reactive moves. It was a fully formed strategy, a sequence of events I would now set into motion. The Vances thought they were reeling me in. It was time to make them believe the prize was even bigger than they imagined. So big they would abandon all caution to grab it. I didn't call Lawrence. Instead, I called Mark. Dad? I was getting worried. He said, the relief in his voice genuine. Just had to clear my head, son, I said, my tone warm and paternal. Listen, that dinner was good for me. It made me realize some things. Your mother, she would have wanted me to be a part of your new family, not an obstacle. I've been selfish. No, Dad, you haven't, he protested a little too quickly. Yes, I have, and I'm going to make it right. First, I'm calling Sarah Jenkins to take the house off the market. It's yours. My gift. No strings attached. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on his end, then a whoop of joy. Dad, that's amazing. Thank you. Darian will be thrilled. There's more, I said, letting the hook sink deeper. Lawrence was right. I'm getting older. I can't manage my portfolio forever. It's time I started thinking about the future, about legacy. I let that word hang in the air. Legacy. To a man like Lawrence Vance, it was the ultimate siren song. I'm thinking of setting up a new family trust, I continued, as if the idea were just forming. A vehicle to manage all my assets and ensure they pass seamlessly to the next generation. To you and to your children. A trust? Wow, Dad, that's serious. It is, I said, my voice heavy with gravitas. But I can't just hand over the keys, Mark. You have to earn it. You have to prove to me that you're ready for that kind of responsibility. That you and your new family have the vision to grow what I've built, not just squander it. This was the core of the bait. I wasn't just offering them money. I was offering them a challenge. A challenge that would appeal directly to Mark's desperate need to prove himself and to Lawrence's colossal ego. What do you mean? Mark asked, his voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I want you to prepare an investment plan, I said. A formal proposal. Show me how you, with the guidance of your future father-in-law, would manage the trust's assets. I want to see your strategy, your 5-year, 10-year vision. Don't worry about the exact numbers in my portfolio for now. Just build a framework based on a significant 8-figure capital base. Put together a professional presentation. Show me you're ready to be a man, Mark. Show me you're ready to lead this family. The silence on the other end was thick with the sound of 1,000 gears turning in my son's head. I had just offered him everything he ever wanted, my approval, a path to independence, and the keys to a kingdom he never knew existed. And I had wrapped it all in the one thing Lawrence Vance couldn't resist, the illusion of control. I'll do it, Dad. Mark stammered, his voice filled with a newfound purpose. We'll do it. We won't let you down. I know you won't, son, I said, and ended the call. I hung up the phone and stared out the window of the plane as it began its descent into Denver. The bait was in the water. It was a beautiful, shimmering lure, crafted for my son's hopes and a predator's greed. The next 2 weeks were a study in calculated silence from my end and frantic activity from theirs. Mark called me twice, his voice buzzing with energy. He was working day and night on the presentation. He used words like synergy, diversification, and aggressive growth modeling. They were Lawrence's words, of course, coming out of my son's mouth. Darian sent me a photo of her and Mark in front of the house, a for sale sign with a big sold sticker slapped across it lying on a lawn behind them. Her text read, "Building our future, thanks to you, Frank. Can't wait for you to see what we're planning. Love." They were completely consumed. They saw the finish line. They saw a docile old man, filled with regret and a desire to hand over his fortune. They were so focused on the prize, they never thought to ask one simple question. Why now? Why would a man who was ready to sell their house over an 11-word text message suddenly be prepared to hand them his entire legacy? Arrogance is a more powerful anesthetic than any drug. It dulls the senses, silences the instinct for self-preservation. They thought they had outmaneuvered me at that dinner. They thought their charm had won the day. They had no idea that all they had done was confirm their own indictment. Silas sent me one last email. It wasn't a report. It was a single line of text. Lawrence Vance just took out a new bridge loan against his house. High interest, 90-day term. Looks like he's betting everything on a big score coming soon. Of course he was. He was pushing all his chips to the center of the table. He was so sure of his hand, he couldn't see the glint of the pistol under his opponent's jacket. I replied to Silas with 2 words. Book it. He knew what I meant. A conference room. Neutral ground. A place with no exits except the ones I controlled. The stage was being set. The actors had learned their lines. The final act was about to begin. The call came from Mark a week later. "Dad, we're ready," he said, his voice taut with a mixture of pride and nerves. "The presentation is done. I think you're going to be really impressed." "I'm looking forward to it, son," I said, keeping my tone encouraging. "Where and when?" Well, Lawrence thought it would be best to do this in a professional setting, to show you how seriously we're taking this. He's booked the Aspen Conference Room at the Four Seasons downtown. Friday, 10 a.m. Is that okay? The Four Seasons. Perfect. It was a classic Lawrence Vance move, using the trappings of wealth to create an atmosphere of legitimacy. It was also, conveniently, a place where I had an account, a place where the staff knew me not as a flashy high roller, but as a quiet, serious man who valued discretion. 10 a.m. it is, I said. I'll be there. Over the next 2 days, I made my own preparations. They were quiet, precise, and entirely invisible. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to John Tenney, my lawyer, instructing him to be at the hotel coffee shop at 9:45 a.m. The second was to a private number in Houston. "Arthur," I said. It's Frank Miller. How do you feel about a trip to Denver? First-class flight, a suite at the Four Seasons. All expenses paid. There was a pause. What's the catch, Frank? No catch, I said. Just a front-row seat to a corporate restructuring, and a chance to look an old partner in the eye. I could hear the slow intake of breath on his end. Just tell me when and where, he said. On Friday morning. I dressed with deliberate care. I chose the same unassuming gray suit I'd worn to the dinner. I wanted to look exactly as they remembered me. A harmless retiree, a soft touch. I met John in the lobby. He was, as always, the picture of legal gravitas in a dark pinstripe suit, his leather briefcase held firmly in hand. A few minutes later, Arthur Finch arrived. The trip had done him good. He stood a little straighter, and the weary resignation in his eyes had been replaced by a hard, focused glint. He looked less like a victim and more like a witness for the prosecution. Gentlemen, I said with a slight nod, thank you for coming. John, you're my legal counsel. Arthur, for the purposes of this meeting, you are my senior geological and acquisitions advisor. You say nothing. You just sit, you listen, and you look at Mr. Vance. Arthur gave a thin, grim smile. With pleasure. We took the elevator up to the conference floor. The air was cool and smelled of expensive cleaning products and ambition. As we approached the Aspen room, the door opened. Mark stood there, beaming, his face flushed with excitement. Dad, you're here. Come on in. His eyes flickered to John and Arthur, a brief flash of confusion on his face. We walked in. The room was impressive, with a long mahogany table, leather chairs, and a stunning view of the Rocky Mountains. At the head of the table sat Lawrence and Darian. Lawrence, in a power suit and a tie the color of money, looked like a king holding court. Darian was the picture of the supportive, elegant fiancé. They both rose, their smiles wide and confident. Frank, so glad you could make it, Lawrence boomed, extending a hand. His eyes darted to my companions. And you brought your team? The question was light, but there was an edge to it. This wasn't in his script. Just my advisors, I said smoothly, gesturing to the seats. John Tenney, my attorney, and Arthur Finch, a consultant with a great deal of experience in the energy sector. I watched Lawrence's face as I said Arthur's name. For a split second, the mask slipped. His smile faltered. A flicker of recognition, then confusion, then dismissal passed through his eyes. He hadn't seen Arthur in 15 years. The name was a ghost, a minor detail from a distant, triumphant past. He shook Arthur's hand without a second thought, the consummate professional greeting a nobody. It was a fatal error. We all took our seats. Mark, at the head of the table opposite me, nervously booted up his laptop, which was connected to a large screen on the wall. Darian sat beside him, a reassuring hand on his arm. Lawrence sat next to her, leaning back in his chair like a man who already owned the room. And on my side of the table, there was me, my lawyer, and the ghost of Houston past. The trap was set. The players were in position. Well, Mark, I said, my voice calm and inviting. The floor is yours. My son took a deep breath and began. Mark's presentation was everything I expected it to be. It was slick, professional, and utterly soulless. It was filled with charts, graphs, and all the right buzzwords. Aggressive growth, synergistic diversification, leveraged real estate acquisitions. He spoke with a passion I hadn't seen in him in years, a desperate, earnest desire to impress me. He was a good soldier, executing a battle plan he didn't understand. Darian watched him with a look of pure, theatrical adoration, occasionally nodding at a key point, as if she understood the intricacies of a collateralized debt obligation. Lawrence leaned back, a smug, satisfied expression on his face. He was the ventriloquist, watching his dummy perform flawlessly. And throughout it all, Arthur Finch just stared. He didn't look at the screen. He didn't look at Mark. His tired, unwavering gaze was fixed on one man, Lawrence Vance. It was a heavy, suffocating stare, the weight of 15 years of ruin concentrated into a single point of pressure. Lawrence, caught up in his moment of triumph, didn't even notice. Finally, Mark concluded with a flourish. A slide popped up with a projected 10-year growth, a beautiful, impossible hockey stick curve shooting toward the sky. So, Mark said, his chest puffed out, his face beaming. That's our vision. That's the future we can build. Together. He looked at me, his eyes shining with hope, waiting for the applause, for the validation, for the ceremonial handing over of the keys to the kingdom. The room fell silent. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of it press down on them. I saw Mark's smile begin to waver. Darian's brow furrowed in confusion. Lawrence shifted in his seat, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. When I finally spoke, I didn't look at my son. My gaze went directly to Lawrence. It's a bold plan, I began, my voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. Very bold. It's also reckless, amateurish, and fundamentally fraudulent. The change in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous. It was like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a violent storm. Mark paled. Dad, what? I held up a hand, silencing him without looking away from Lawrence. This isn't an investment plan, I continued, my voice cold and methodical. It's a liquidation plan, a strategy to systematically transfer assets from a low-risk, stable portfolio into a series of high-risk, illiquid ventures. Ventures, I notice, that are all connected to shell corporations that you, Lawrence, control. Lawrence's smug expression vanished, replaced by a stony mask. Now hold on, Frank. This is a standard strategy for aggressive growth. Don't. I cut him off, my voice dropping an octave. Don't insult my intelligence. I didn't spend 30 years dissecting companies like yours not to recognize a textbook bust-out scheme when I see it. This isn't about building my family's future. This is about you securing a lifeline. It's about paying off the third mortgage on your house. It's about settling your maxed-out credit lines and funding this fantasy life you've built on a foundation of debt and deceit. This is outrageous. Darian gasped, playing the part of the offended fiancé. I finally turned my eyes to her. They were as cold as a winter lake. Was it also outrageous to identify a lonely widower, isolate his son, and perform a liquidity test with a $250,000 house before moving in for the main target? It was a good plan. Almost. I turned back to Lawrence, who was now white as a sheet. Your problem, Lawrence, is that your methods lack originality. You seem to have a playbook, and you run the same plays over and over again. My gaze deliberately shifted to the silent man at my side. Isn't that right, Arthur? At the sound of his name, spoken with such intent, Lawrence finally seemed to see the man across from him. His eyes widened. The blood drained from his face. He looked at Arthur Finch as if he were seeing a ghost. You, Lawrence whispered, a single word filled with disbelief and dawning horror. I didn't give him time to recover. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the polished table. I believe your last joint venture was called Brazos Energy Development, I said, my voice like chipping ice. A 50-50 partnership. Your partner provided the genius, a revolutionary subterranean mapping algorithm. You provided the paperwork. Paperwork that at the last minute transferred 100% of the patent rights to a new holding company moments before you sold it to a competitor, leaving your partner with nothing but legal bills and an empty office in Houston. At that, my lawyer, John, placed his leather briefcase on the table. The clicks of the latches were the loudest sound in the world. He pulled out a single, thick manila folder and slid it across the table. It stopped directly in front of Lawrence. Inside that folder, Lawrence, I said softly, are copies of your original 50-50 partnership agreement with Mr. Finch. Emails where you discuss your shared future. Even a charming cocktail napkin where you scrawled Finch and Vance. 50-50 to the moon. It's not a legal case, perhaps, but it's a hell of a story. I'm sure the SEC, the IRS, and the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Texas would find it fascinating reading, especially when juxtaposed with your current attempt to defraud me. The room was a tomb. Mark stared, his mouth agape, looking from me to a shell-shocked Lawrence, his world crumbling in real time. I stood up. Here is what happens now. I announced, the finality in my voice absolute. You have two options. There's no third. Option 1. Your daughter here will walk over to my son. She will return her engagement ring. The engagement is over. Today, you and your family will disappear from my son's life and never contact him or me again. In return, this folder gets locked in a vault, and Mr. Finch and I will consider your debt to society paid. Option 2, I continued, letting the words land with the force of blows, is that you refuse. And my next call will be to the U.S. attorney. You will be bankrupted, you will be prosecuted for conspiracy to commit fraud, and you, Lawrence, will likely spend your golden years in a federal correctional institution. You have 60 seconds to choose. Chapter 9, The Unveiling. The 60 seconds I gave them were the longest of my son's life. For me, they were a formality. I knew the choice Lawrence would make. Men like him are survivors above all else. They'll sacrifice any piece on the board, pawn, queen, even their own child's happiness, to save the king. But in that minute, the masks didn't just slip, they were violently torn off. Darian was the first to break. Her face, a moment ago a carefully constructed canvas of beauty and grace, contorted into a snarl of pure, undiluted fury. The honey was gone, replaced by venom. "You old bastard," she hissed at me, her voice low and trembling. "You think you're so clever, sitting there, judging everyone." Then she turned on Mark, and what came out was not the voice of a loving fiancé, but of a frustrated handler whose asset had just been devalued to zero. "And you," she spat, pointing a finger at him. "You useless, spineless coward. I told you he was a problem. I told you we needed to handle him, but you kept saying, 'He's my dad, he just needs time.' You couldn't even manage your own father. You are pathetic." Lawrence, seeing the game was irretrievably lost, let his own facade crumble into dust. The charm, the bonhomie, it all evaporated, leaving behind the bitter, resentful core of a lifelong failure. "She's right, you know," he sneered, not at me, but at Mark. "We gave you the golden goose, and you couldn't even get it to lay the damn egg. All you had to do was keep the old man happy. A simple task, and you couldn't even do that. You're just like your mother, I bet." Soft. Each word was a physical blow to my son. I watched him, unflinching. This was the most painful part of the lesson, but the most necessary. He had to see them for what they were, stripped of all artifice. He had to hear what they said about him when they no longer had any reason to pretend. He sat frozen, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He was seeing the woman he loved, the man he admired, and they were monsters. The world he had built for himself over the past year was revealed to be a stage set, and he was the only one who hadn't known he was an actor in their play. Darian, in a final dramatic act of contempt, ripped the diamond ring from her finger. It wasn't a gesture of heartbreak. It was one of disgust, as if she were shucking an oyster that had gone bad. She didn't hand it to Mark. She threw it. The ring, a 2-carat symbol of my money and his hope, skittered across the polished mahogany table and fell silently onto the plush carpet. "We're done," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. Then she turned, grabbed her purse, and strode out of the room without a backward glance. Lawrence stood up, straightening his expensive suit, a pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of dignity. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost admirable. "You'll regret this, Miller," he said. "No, Lawrence," I replied, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You will." He gave Arthur a final, venomous look and then followed his daughter out of the room, leaving the heavy door to swing shut behind them, sealing the tomb. For a long moment, the three of us, me, my lawyer, and my son, sat in the deafening silence. The view of the mountains from the window was beautiful, serene, utterly indifferent to the human wreckage in the room. Mark hadn't moved. He was still staring at the empty space where Darian had been. He looked small in the oversized leather chair, like a little boy who had just watched his whole world burn down. Slowly, his eyes lifted and met mine. There was no anger in them, no accusation, just a vast, hollow emptiness, and a single, dawning question. He wasn't asking how I could have done this to them. He was beginning to understand that I had done this for him. He pushed his chair back, stood up on unsteady legs, and walked out of the conference room without saying a word. He didn't slam the door. He just left, a ghost leaving his own haunting. "John," Tenney finally broke the silence. "That was efficient, Frank. I nodded, my gaze falling on the glittering diamond lying on the floor. Loose ends, I said. I bent down, picked it up, and dropped it into my pocket. An asset to be liquidated. Arthur Finch looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than bitterness in his eyes. It was a kind of weary respect. Did you know they turn on him like that? He asked. Predators always abandon a failed hunt, I said, gathering my things. And when they're cornered, they always turn on the weakest member of the pack. We walked out into the hushed, elegant hallway of the Four Seasons, leaving the scene of the execution behind us. I had won. I had protected my son. I had protected my legacy. But standing there, in the aftermath of my own perfectly executed strategy, I felt no triumph. Just the cold, heavy reality of what it had cost. The battle was over, but the war for my son's soul was just beginning. It's been 6 months. I'm back in my garden. The peace roses are in full bloom. Their pale, creamy blossoms a stark contrast to the memory of that sterile conference room. The air smells of damp earth and forgiveness, just like Ellen always said. Mark and I are sitting on the porch swing she and I installed 20 years ago. We're drinking iced tea. We don't talk much. The silence between us isn't angry anymore. It's reconstructive, like the quiet around a building site where the old, rotten structure has been demolished and the new foundation is being carefully laid, one brick at a time. He went through hell. The weeks after that day at the Four Seasons were a blur of grief, rage, and profound humiliation for him. He had to untangle his life from theirs, a painful process of closing joint accounts, changing his number, and explaining to bewildered friends that the wedding was off. He had to face the fact that his entire relationship had been a lie. He had to face his own blindness, his own weakness. He didn't talk to me for a month. I let him be. I knew he needed to process the trauma on his own terms. Pushing him would only make it worse. Then one day, he just showed up at my door. He looked thin, tired, but his eyes were clear for the first time in a year. Can I come in? He'd asked. He works now. He's not managing any phantom portfolios. I made a call to a friend who runs a large-scale commercial construction company, one of my first ever clients. Mark started at the bottom. He's a project assistant. He spends his days on dusty, noisy job sites, carrying blueprints, checking supply manifests, and learning how things are actually built. From the ground up, with steel and concrete and sweat. He hates it, and he's never missed a day of work. He's living in a small apartment downtown. He pays his own rent. He's learning the value of a dollar that he has earned, not one that has been given. The house, the one on Aspen Lane, is empty. I bought it back for myself in a sense. The title is in my name. Sometimes, on weekends, we come over here. He helps me in the garden. We pull weeds. We prune the roses. We build things. Last week, we fixed a loose board on this porch swing. She always hated that squeak, he said, tightening the last bolt. It was the most he'd said about his mother in years. Today, he finally asked the question that had been sitting between us for half a year. Did you know? He asked, not looking at me, but out at the garden. From the beginning, I took a slow sip of my iced tea. No, I said honestly. Not from the beginning. But I know patterns. People, like companies, have patterns of behavior. Theirs was a pattern of acquisition and consumption. And you were the target. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear the drone of that distant lawnmower, the same sound I'd heard the day I got that text message. Why didn't you just tell me? He asked, his voice low. Why did the whole show, the presentation, humiliated me like that? I finally turned to look at him. His jaw was set, his hands clenched around his glass. He wasn't the soft, eager-to-please boy from 6 months ago. There was a new hardness in him, a core of steel that had been forged in the fire of his own humiliation. Because, Mark, I said, my voice gentle but firm, if I had just told you, you would have seen it as a father trying to control his son. You would have defended her. You would have fought me. And they would have won. You needed to see them for yourself. You needed to hear what they really thought of you when you were no longer of any use to them. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived. He nodded slowly, the truth of my words settling into the quiet spaces between us. He understood. I don't know if our relationship will ever be what it was. The easy, uncomplicated affection is gone, replaced by something more complex, more adult. It's built on a harder, more painful truth. But it's real. He finished his tea and stood up. I should get going. Have to be on site at 6 tomorrow. I'll see you next weekend? I asked. Yeah, Dad. See you next weekend. I watched him walk to his modest, second-hand car. He moved with a new purpose, a new weight. I had saved my son, but I had been forced to break his heart to do it. I looked down at my roses. To protect a garden, you can't just admire the flowers. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty. You have to be willing to identify the blight, the parasites, the invasive weeds that would choke the life out of everything you love. And then you have to be willing to rip them out, all the way down to the root, no matter the cost.